In the tapestry of life, where every thread holds a story, America in Black and White emerges as a haven for the voices echoing through the heart of our communities. In this podcast, we wade through the rivers of our collective experiences, celebrating the vibrant hues of change brought forth by the whispers of hope and the roars of action. It's more than just a conversation. It's a journey into the heart of our society, illuminated by the light of those daring to dream and do. Join us, and let your voice be the melody that guides us toward a dawn where every color finds its place in the masterpiece of our shared destiny. Together, let's paint a future brimming with the positives that dwell in our minds and the actions that shape our world.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight on America in Black and White, we step into the space where conflict, culture, leadership, and transformation collide, the gray area. Our guest is a man who has built an entire career helping people navigate those spaces with clarity, courage, and compassion. Dr. Derrick D. Dixon is not just a conflict resolution strategist, he is a systems thinker, a restorative justice practitioner, a Lean Six Sigma black belt, and a higher education leader who has spent more than a decade guiding institutions through some of their most complex challenges. From student conduct reform to crisis response, from organizational investigations to large-scale process improvement, Dr. Dixon has become a trusted voice for leaders and communities seeking sustainable change. As the founder of the Gray Area Institute for Conflict Resolution, he has helped organizations across the country move from dysfunction to alignment, from uncertainty to accountability, and from chaos to growth. And as Assistant Dean of Student Administration at New York Institute of Technology College of Osteopathic Medicine at Arkansas State University, he continues to shape the next generation of leaders through systems-level innovation and student-centered strategy. But behind the titles and accolades is a powerful story, one shaped by community, by purpose, by Black history, and by the people who poured into him. Tonight, we explore the life, the work, and the mission of a man who believes that the greatest opportunities for growth are found in the gray areas. This is America in Black and White, and this is Dr. Derrick Dixon. Welcome to the show, sir.
Hold on, trying to get my mute off, my mic on. Thank you so much, Charles, man. I appreciate you for that introduction. That was a lot. I appreciate that.
Yes, sir. Well, you're more than welcome, and I'm glad that you're here. And thanks for taking the time to be here to share your story, and as well as information that's going to be great for the community to pick up and learn from the experiences in which you're going to be talking about. Absolutely. Is there anything you'd like to say to the audience before we get going?
No, I just appreciate you all for creating the space for me to come in. I appreciate the opportunity to share with your audience. I don't take that lightly. When someone exposes you to their community that they have built, when the fact that you've done that, I want you to know that I don't take that lightly. So I appreciate it.
Well, I definitely appreciate that, and let me acknowledge the few people that are here already here in the chat. The first person is Grace, and she says she's here and she's here to watch the show. Welcome, Grace, and I hope you enjoy the show. Please stay, and if you've got questions and comments, please put them in the chat. And here is, he says, whoever this is. So at any rate, let's get into the show.
Mm-hmm.
And let's start with, as stated, I'd like for people to get the opportunity to know who Dr. Dixon was before you became Dr. Dixon.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell us, who was Derrick Dixon before the titles, the degrees, and the leadership role?
Right. That's one of the things that I'm always cognizant of, just maintaining who I am. I grew up in rural Mississippi, And I think that a lot of times where, as I talk about my story, I think a lot of times when we get to these spaces of position and power, we kind of lose sight on where we are and forget the beginning. And so I grew up in rural Mississippi, Camden, Mississippi, a little small community. At the time when I was in Camden, it probably was a post office, a high school, and a library, and that pretty much was where we grew up. But and I grew up in a space where we didn't have a lot of resources. But the older I've gotten and the more I've interacted with people across the nation, I realized that we may not have had a lot of resources, but we had a really strong community. And I think that a lot of times we take for granted how much of an impact having a strong family and a strong community has on shaping an individual. So I went to a small high school. We were in a pretty good school district, but in the state of Mississippi, one of the things that a lot of people don't realize, and I'm not saying that it's only in Mississippi, but in the state of Mississippi, schools are only partially funded by the state. And so the rest of the funding comes through property taxes. And so while we were in a good school district, we grew up in a space where people didn't own a lot of property. So a lot of resources that we just didn't have, if that makes sense. And so oftentimes people on our end of the north end of the district, which is where I grew up, it wasn't expected for us to do much beyond going beyond high school and pretty much just going and working in a factory or doing some menial labor. Now I want to be clear that I don't think that anything is wrong with working in a factory or anything like that, but just painting a picture of what was expected of us, if that makes sense. And so I chose to go to college. I went to Mississippi State University, and I got on campus, and I took for granted how much of a shock that was going to be for me, because coming from a community similar to where I came from and then going into that space, I kind of got lost in the community, wasn't going to class, wasn't doing the things that I needed to do in order to be a good student. And I ended that first semester, I think I had like a 0.66 GPA. Like that was the end of my first semester. And I was like, Charles, I said, I didn't even know you could get a zero. Like, I didn't even know, like, because when I graduated in the top of my class. I'm like top 10, top whatever. And then I see that. But that was one of the most transformative moments for me because it was my first real kind of punch in the face with failure. And the dean at the time, or my academic advisor, he told me, he said, the only way I'm going to give you the ability to come back is if you start building relationships with student affairs, student administration. And so they had all these requirements that I had to do. So along the way, I had to work a desk job at housing. I had to meet with academic advisors every week to make sure that I was progressing in the way that I needed to progress. I had to attend events, and I had to do all those things. And in that moment, even though I didn't see working in a higher education as my career, it was molding me. And by the time I got ready to graduate, I realized that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to grow and shape and help students to become, whatever they wanted to be. And so I left there. I moved to Jonesboro, Arkansas, and I started working on my master's, which is currently where I'm located now. But I started working on my master's. I started working on my doctorate. And then I was working at Arkansas State in student conduct. And right around the time when I was kind of in the middle of my doctoral coursework, I got a call from a colleague that said that the University of Mississippi was preparing to build a new office on their campus, the Office of Student Conduct, but they wanted it to be rooted in conflict resolution and restorative justice. And so that kind of was my introduction to the philosophy, and I got invited to be one of the staff members that created that. And it was really exciting because it's not often that you can have the ability to say that you created a department on a flagship institution. So I went there. I was at Ole Miss for about 7 years, and then I had started consulting around that time, kind of building restorative justice processes across the nation, building conflict resolution systems across the nation. And then I got a call from the University of Oklahoma, and they said, hey, we are hoping to revamp our department and build it similar to, like, do a revamp, not necessarily build it from scratch. So I went out there. I was at OU for about 2 years. It was right in the middle of COVID. Nobody knew COVID was about to happen when I took the job. And then I needed to get back closer to the Memphis area, and I got an opportunity. I got recruited to come work here at the New York Institute of Technology, College of Osteopathic Medicine, and I've been here for about 4 years. But I've worked with leaders across multiple institutions throughout my career and built processes and sat in spaces where I never thought I would have been. But all of that, the foundation comes from just being able to be comfortable in my own space and being able to know that I have people in my background that prepared me for these type of spaces. Individuals that never stepped foot on a college campus, people that they don't have these high esteemed titles, just community that allowed me to grow and develop into the person that I am today.
So, what early experiences shaped your understanding of conflict in community?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, man, because I think that just the interactions that I had with just my family and with the community, because we were so tight knit, if that makes sense. Like, when we grew up together, we knew everybody in the high school. It wasn't 300 people in a class. It was 300 people in the whole entire school. And so my graduating class, we probably had like 70 people. And so the community has just always been one of those things where you just kind of know we're all coming from the same space and we have to take care of each other. And the same thing with my family. I was processing through that conflict question earlier. Well, I don't even know why I was just randomly thinking about it. But it's interesting that a lot of my interest in conflict, and it sounds weird, but watching sitcoms growing up, like just when you think about Family Matters or Fresh Prince or a lot of those shows that were focused and centered around family, but the primary focus is every episode there's a conflict that needs to be resolved before the show goes off. And so just it always was just something that was intriguing to me, even as I was younger, to say, how are they going to resolve this, whatever, no matter how crazy it may be during that period of time. And then I also had situations where I would notice that my peers would always come to me and they would say, hey, we need help processing through this, or can you help me resolve the issue? And when I got to college and I got into grad school and started doing the student conduct work, all of those different type of things just started to make sense because the work came natural to me. And when I was doing just traditional student conduct, I always wondered, like, yeah, we have adjudicated the policy, but did we resolve the conflict that was underlying that the student had? And that didn't come full circle to me until I got to Ole Miss, where we had this group of young ladies that no matter where they saw each other, it was an issue. Whether it was an argument, whether it was a fist fight, it didn't matter. It was about 8 of them. And I remember we had removed them from the residence halls. We had fined them. We had given them all of these different sanctions that come along with the conduct process. But it wasn't until we did a conflict resolution gathering with them to where we really found the root of what they had going on, and we were able to resolve that. And we didn't have any other issues with those young women beyond that. And for me, that's when the click happened. And after that, I just kind of immersed myself into conflict resolution literature and theory and practice, and I've just been building on it throughout the time that I've been a professional.
So, when did you first realize you had a gift for helping people navigate difficult situations?
I don't know if I have a specific point, but I can remember as an undergraduate student, because you remember I talked about how I had my struggles. By junior year, I had became an RA. And it seemed as though at that point in time, I would have students seek me out who wasn't even necessarily residents in the building that I lived in, because they were struggling or they had issues that were going on, and they would seek me out and look for guidance on how to resolve the issue. Again, at that point in time, I still wasn't sold in saying that I was going to work in higher education, But I realized that those were the seeds that were starting to be planted. And then by the time I did get into the scope of higher ed, so I don't know how familiar you are with higher education or student affairs. So there are so many different functional areas, whether it's admissions, whether it's financial aid, you have people that work in student housing, student conduct, all the different areas. And the place that just felt the most natural to me was student conduct.
Wow. So, what role did your upbringing play in your approach to leadership?
I didn't come from it, and we didn't do a lot of arguing in my house growing up. Like there were times where you knew you had to be held accountable and you got held accountable, but my mom was never the person that just yelled at you just to yell at you. And me and my siblings, we didn't really do a lot of back and forth fighting. So I already had a kind of a foundation of being able to be comfortable going and sitting down and having conversations, hard conversations when I needed to. And so it's just the culture that was created by my mom. Like I can't even think of a time where my mom just went overboard at, I mean, she held us accountable. It wasn't a situation where you can go do what you wanted to do, if that makes sense. But she knew how to do it in a way in which she could allow you to still be a kid, but then also know that there's things that you have to do in order to be better. And so that was one of those things that I just kind of always took kind of this even keel perspective, like the way that I'm engaging now. I don't go too much higher or too much lower than where I'm at now, even when we're in a crisis situation. And I think just my demeanor and personality has served me well in working in this type of space, because a lot of times people struggle with conflict because they don't know how to manage the emotion that floods you once you get into that space of entering a conflict. And if you don't know how to um, keep yourself into your rational space and away from the emotional space, then you're gonna struggle managing conflict. But I've learned how to keep myself in that space.
So as you mentioned that, can you tell us what are some of the things that you learned? Well, there's two things. It's a two-pronged question.
Hmm.
What did you learn? How did you learn to actually work with the conflict resolution? And why is it that conflict resolution is the thing that you always felt like it was a solvable thing that you wanted to do?
I don't know. I think it just happened. I think it was just me being in a space where, when I worked as an RA, one of the things that they teach you when you're an RA is how to manage crisis. Because you got to go in and be able to de-escalate and resolve issues, even as a student. And so I just always had, I don't know, I just always had a space where I didn't mind doing that. I know my peers would get very uncomfortable having to go in and have conversations with students and be able to say, look, we got to do better, or you all can't do that. I didn't have that, just that natural ability to not allow myself to be overtaken by the emotion of the situation. I feel like it just came naturally. I don't know if there was just one moment where it was like, this is what you have to do, or this is what you need to do in order to get to that point. I think it just kind of, I think it's just my, I think it's just my space, if that makes sense.
Okay. How did your identity as a black man influence your path into conflict resolution?
I don't know if I've ever thought about it like that in terms of entering conflict resolution. I know that it influenced the work that I did when I became a professional, especially during the time where, it was kind of the height of, the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, the, diversity, equity, inclusion space in higher education. Like right now, that space is in a space where they don't necessarily know what it's going to look like moving forward. But when I came into the profession, it was really in a space that was growing and established. And I worked in environments not only on the campus that I was on, but just with individuals across the nation. Like, we have students who are struggling trying to figure out, do they belong in this institution, and how do we create a space for them to know that they're welcome here, but also we have to make sure that we're balancing the rights of all students, if that makes sense. And so it's not always as simple as, when you're a public institution, it's not always as simple as saying, oh, well, we got to ban that group on either side. from coming on campus, because the reality is that all of them are our students until they're, so we have to make sure we're creating that space for all of them. So as a person of color, as an African American male, I had a lot of conversations with students, helping them understand the dynamics that go along with understanding, First Amendment rights, First Amendment speech, helping them understand, the challenges that an institution is trying to balance when they're creating a space for everyone, especially as a public institution, because you're receiving resources and funds from all sides. And so being able to have the identity that I have, and also being well versed, allowed me to support students of color in their process and helping them understand what's realistic and what's not realistic. I'm very intentional about not going into a space and rallying people up on stuff that's just not a realistic reality, if that makes sense.
Yes, sir. So, what challenges did you face early in your career that prepared you for the work you do now?
Man, one of the biggest challenges I had growing as a young professional is that, and I when I mentor young professionals now, I kind of talk to them about it, is understanding is understanding how do you go into a space and maintain being authentic, number one, but then number two, how do you channel all of the skills that you have? Because when I walk through the door, it's like I got all these ideas. I got, all of the things that I feel like I can do to change the world, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But the reality is that the professional world humbles you pretty quickly and let you know that, just because you think it's a good idea don't always mean that it's gonna be a good idea. And a lot of times I struggled with that because I felt like people weren't listening to me because they had a vendetta against me, as opposed to whether or not the idea that I had was a good idea. And so a lot of times I would alienate myself from individuals because they may not have liked the decision. They didn't like a project that I was working on, or they didn't give me an opportunity, or they didn't promote me, or they didn't do any of that. And I had to learn that, in our careers, we're so caught up on trying to get to the top so fast that a lot of times we miss the journey, if that makes sense. And
yes, sir.
Trying to get to the top of the organization, I wasn't appreciating what I was picking up along the way. And I feel like by the time I got to Oklahoma, I was able to slow down and just really appreciate the journey, as opposed to being so caught up on trying to be a vice president before I turned 30 or 31 years old. And then if you get to that moment, where do you go from there? You become president, and then those aren't jobs that you can hold for a long period of time because they're so high stress. And so appreciate the journey. And so that's what I talk to a lot of young professionals now. Like, you don't have to have your doctorate completed before you turn 25. You don't have to be at the top of the organization by the time you turn 30, because when you rush through the journey, you're going to miss so many things that you need for once you finally get to that spot.
So, what is one moment from your childhood that still guides your decisions today?
Oh, wow. Man, that's a good question. I'm a processor, Charles, so it may take me a second to process. I think one of the biggest moments that guided me from childhood was just even as a younger person or child, I noticed how people observe you, right? Or how they perceive you, I guess perceive. I remember I was going to a store and I was, I don't know what happened, but I had something in my eye. And I walked into the store and I was about to get something off the shelf. I picked it up and I put it back because something was in my eye. So I walked into the bathroom to figure out what was going on with my eye. And then I came back out and I picked back up what it was that I was about to buy. And then I walked up to the counter, and one of the people behind the counter walked up and they was like, hey, you need to watch him and check him because I think he just went in that bathroom and put something in his pocket. I think that he's stealing. And so even as a kid, I was like that thought never even crossed my mind, if that makes sense. Like going in trying to take something. Like I said, we didn't come from a lot of resources, but stealing was something that never even was a thought for me. And I remember processing through that throughout that day, and I was thinking to myself, like, you always have to be aware of how people perceive you because that person, I'm like 9, 10 years old, but that person perceived me as a thief, and I had no intentions of doing that, if that makes sense. And so that self-awareness and that perception and how I present myself is still something that I always think about when I'm entering a space.
What I think is troubling about that is that, it happens to all of us a
Mhm.
lot. But can you tell us, in that situation from then up to now, what does that do for your awareness? What does that do for your psyche, when you're just out in the general public? I mean, are you thinking in a sense that people are just watching you? What does that do?
I don't think it's always in the forefront, but I think it's one of those subconscious messages, if that makes sense. Like now, like even thinking through this now, that's probably the reason why I remember I was at Walmart one day. I was with my youngest brother, and and the woman behind the counter said, "Do you need a receipt?" And he said no, and I said, "No, you always need a receipt because that's the way that you get out the door, if that makes sense." And so it's just things like that where it's like, or if I'll go to a store, I'm not gonna get too close to the door if I have something in my hand. Like if I pick up something, I'll make sure that I'm well within the store. So it's
Right.
obvious that I'm not trying to go out. So I don't necessarily think of it. I don't think it's something that I carry in the forefront of my mind, but I think that it is something that probably subconsciously that I think about because when you ask me the question, out of all of the moments that I could think about that shaped my childhood, that was the one that kind of came to my perspective, like to the front of my thought process.
Well, there's a comment here from Dr. Carswell. I'll put it on the screen. He says, Amen. Hashtag emotional intelligence. Hashtag self identity. Hashtag confidence.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But because, I'll tell you this as I move on. But, whenever I go anywhere, my awareness is to do one thing. It matters not the situation. When I pay for what I pay for, I always get my receipt because my receipt is my timestamp. And so it takes me everywhere I go that, I have them in my car. Don't stop me and ask me nothing stupid because if you do, then now I'm gonna have to take you to the next level because I need you to tell me what is going on here. So I have
Right,
the whole timeline.
right, right, absolutely. And as a black man, when you walk out that door, you better have a receipt.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Who were the people who believed in you before you believed in yourself?
Man, I was having this conversation with one of my high school coaches today. He was telling me that when I played basketball for him, he said he thought I was going to go into coaching, but he knew it was going to be something that involved leading people because by nature, I'm just now getting comfortable in this space where I'm at now, where I spent a very large portion of my life just trying to blend into the background, if that makes sense. Not necessarily not trying to get things done or not trying to be successful or anything like that, but I just wanted to blend in, do what I needed to do, and just kind of, what the old saying, you go, you do your job, and then you pack up your lunch pail and go home. And so that's kind of always the approach that I took. But I realized that it don't matter where I've been, whether it was a student, whether it was when I was working in as a professional, working at like fast food jobs, I always got tapped to be the person that lead whatever situation that we had going on. And so my coach, I was talking to him about it, and he said, that's just because when you walk into a space, people can see it, and you may not even realize it, but they see the presence and that you have the skills and the demeanor to lead them through spaces that they don't necessarily know that they can make it through. And so he was one of the first people that gave me that feedback, or he was one of the most recent people. But when I was working when I started my first job, one of my mentors, Dr. Lionel Maiden, I don't know what meeting we were in, but apparently I was at the table and I was talking, and I guess I was talking too much. And he pulled me to the side after the meeting and he said, "I'm gonna tell you something, Doc." He said, "You didn't do anything wrong in this meeting, but I can tell you was trying to overcompensate." And he said, "A mentor once told me, when a lion walks into a room, he don't have to roar for people to know that he's a lion." And he was telling me that, you can hold that space and you don't have to feel like you can overcompensate it, because people already know you have what's needed to have in order for you to be successful.
There's a couple of comments here that I'm need to just put real quick from Dr. Carswell again. Just to follow up to the last question, he says exactly we meant Mr. Dixon. He says absolutely, but it's crazy. We have to prove ourselves. And then he says, great conversation. Thanks for sharing your knowledge, Mr. Dixon.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Dr. Carswell.
What does purpose mean to you at this stage of your life?
For me, it's like, I went through that journey of trying to navigate through professional identity in terms of just trying to make it in advance through the organization so fast that was what I was primarily focused on. And I felt like when I was in that space of my life, I just kind of had these blinders on, that the only thing that I cared about was how do I get to the next step. Now, some of that wasn't necessarily just selfishness. I had reasons in my personal life that I needed to advance so I could get access to more resources. But now the purpose for me is not necessarily being focused on job titles. It's really, does the work mean something to me? And when I was at the University of Oklahoma, I was in the position that I had been working on for my entire career, and I was enjoying the work. But while I was there, I got recruited to do a consultation with NYT, where I work now. That was my initial interaction with NYT. And they had a situation that they needed someone to do some conflict resolution work. And I had a mutual connection with one of the staff members, and they reached out to me. And when I saw the mission of the institution, so, in this space, I'm me. So I'm not an agent of the institution, but I think that it's important for me to just kind of highlight the work that we do, because it's relevant to the question that you have. But, our campus, when people hear NYT, New York Institute of Technology, and then they hear at Arkansas State, because I'm physically in Arkansas, it's kind of confusing. And so in 2016, Arkansas State looked around the state of Arkansas and then also the Mississippi Delta region and realized that, there's a severe shortage of physicians in this region, and especially in the Mississippi Delta region. For whatever reason, they were going to start their own medical school. It didn't matriculate or pan out the way they wanted. And so they saw that they could partner with a medical school. And so that's how the partnership started. So it's a partnership. And our mission is to train, recruit, and place physicians within the Mississippi Delta region. And so when we talk about the Delta, we're referring to Tennessee, Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, Kentucky, Illinois, like all of those states that cluster in the southern region, Midwest to southern region of the country. And because the healthcare is really bad and really struggling. And we know that if we are able to pull individuals from those communities, train them, they're more likely to go back into those spaces in practice as opposed to pulling someone from another institution. And so the purpose for me comes from that, because I grew up in the community similar to what it is that we're hoping to serve. I grew up in rural Mississippi, share with people all the time. I broke my hand. I broke my wrist when I was about 7 years old, and we had to drive over an hour just to get a basic cast. And I think about that now as an adult. Yeah, that was a lot of pain for me, but think about someone that's having a medical emergency or a heart or cardiac emergency. That's a lifetime. And so, my purpose now is, how do I find myself in spaces that make communities similar to where I grew up better, whether it's through healthcare, whether it's through education, whether it's through, just mentoring individuals that come from those communities and giving them spaces to be successful.
So, how do you stay grounded while doing emotionally heavy work?
I try to put myself in a space where, one of my mentors taught me when I was younger, like you have to figure out what your outlets are in terms of what do you need to do to not internalize the work that you're doing. And it takes a while, especially with the work that I've been doing for the last, 12, 13 years. That's like, it's heavy. A lot of heavy outcomes. And I'm just very intentional about making sure that I'm able to separate myself from work. I'm not a person that engulf my whole identity in my work, if that makes sense. So when I leave for the day, yes, I'm available if there's an emergency, but my whole life don't revolve around the work that I do. And by having that separation and just maintaining the things that are important to me and just not constantly be in work mode 24 hours a day, it allows me to kind of separate and keep myself grounded.
Let's move over and talk a little bit about your professional path in higher education leadership.
Hmm.
What drew you to higher education as a career field?
It was that journey that I was making when I was an undergrad student, trying to get my own personal self back on track. Like, I didn't even know that working in higher education. I mean, I guess logically, somebody they're doing the job, but I didn't. Sometimes, when you're growing up and somebody say, "What do you want to be as a professional?" You'll name the jobs like a doctor or a lawyer or a police officer. Like, I never heard anybody say higher education professional, if that makes sense. But it was the journey that I went on of those with those professionals that shaped me and helped me get back on track after I had my hardship, and that's what really drew the interest in me.
To that prior question, the question here in the chat, comment says, I put it on the screen, says stress management. My opinion, you have to strategically take time out for yourself.
Absolutely, Dr. Carswell, because the reality is that if you think the time is just gonna create itself, is not. And so you have to specifically insert that time and make sure that you are taking care of yourself, because if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't be the best version of yourself for others.
So, how did your early roles prepare you for becoming assistant dean?
With the student conduct work, I don't think a lot of people realize, like, so many people stray away from that area in higher education because it's a hard area. It's one of those areas where you have to hold people accountable and you have to be able to have those hard conversations. And because they stray away from it for more like the fun spaces where it's like, student life, fraternity and sorority life, things of that nature, where those spaces are fun and they're going to give you skills as well. But the hard conversations that I would have developing students now turn into the hard conversation that I have developing my staff, if that makes sense. Or being like, if there's something that we have to understand about policies and procedures as an institution, I learned how to navigate and develop policy through student conduct. Or if there's a situation where we have to end a partnership with someone, I kind of equate that to, suspension or expulsion of a student, like being able to have those separation conversations. And so when you get to an executive leadership position in higher ed or in just traditional, like whatever field that you may think about, you are the person that's making decisions. You're the person that's having hard conversations. You're the one that's having to come to the table and make decisions that others may not be comfortable doing. And all of those are foundational skills that you pick up when you work within a student conduct functional area.
So when you're talking about this particular area, are you talking more so about accountability and
Mm-hmm.
ethics and
Yep.
moral values and things of that nature?
Yep, absolutely.
And so in that case, and with the policy that's being set, how do you actually implement that policy to where, you got young kids? So how do you get them to understand that?
Because it's one of those spaces where when you are having genuine conversations with people, and when someone knows that Dr. Dixon is holding me accountable, but he's also building in additional layers to make sure that I'm not in this situation again, people they respond to that. They realize that I'm not just looking at them as, oh, you violated the policy, let me hit you with a hammer and then send you on about your way. It's really that developmental space of, let's process through, how did you end up in that situation, or what can, like, let's say I had a student when I was working with an institution who he kept breaking into the apartments in one of the apartments on campus. And when I sat down with him and I held him accountable for damaging property, breaking into an apartment, that's policy and procedure, that's student conduct. But I also went a step further and said, talk to me about what's going on. Why do you feel the need to do this? And in that moment, I realized that the student was homeless. And so in the process of learning that the student was homeless, I went a step further to figure out, how do we resolve that issue for the student? Because if we don't resolve that issue, then that student is going to still be in that same situation in the future. And so for that student, that's a different level of support. And so when they see me, like, yeah, I held you accountable and I got to pay for this damage to this property, but Dr. Dixon also see me as a person. He see me as a human, and he see that I'm here to help grow and support them beyond those decisions. So it's like, it's a quote that I use in my training that essentially say we have to be able to separate the deed from the doer, because if we just hold them to their deed, we essentially lose their intrinsic worth to the community. But we can hold you accountable for the deed and then also make sure that you're reintegrated back into the community so that you can still be productive as a member of the community.
Wow. So, like, for those students that haven't interacted with you, and for those out in our audience that are listening today, can you tell them, when such policies, like when you put these in place, can you tell them what can they expect when they have to, let's say, come to your office or come to an office of as such administrator, that there's a process that's going on? What can they expect and how should that work?
That process should be very transparent. Every college and university has student handbooks, or they have some kind of way in which they articulate what their code of conduct would be. And it's presented to students, whether it's doing orientation or it's given to them via email or somewhere in which they can have that information readily available. So anytime you are a student on a university campus, you should always be able to know and access the grievance procedures, what it looks like if I have a policy violation, and things of that nature. If you are in a situation where you are documented as potentially violating one of those policies, you should receive what you are being accused of in writing, and you should have the opportunity to be heard. It should never be a situation where somebody just walk into your space and say, somebody told us that you damaged property, you need to pack up your stuff and leave. Like, there should always be a process and a code that goes along with that. And the vast majority of institutions that I've worked with across the nation, they understand that, and they do a really good job of making sure that process and those procedures are followed. So if you're ever in a situation where that's something that you run into, they're supposed to be guiding you through that process, because even though I'm the person that's managing the meetings and the accountability, it's also my job to make sure that you are well versed in what the potential outcomes are and that you're well versed in what you're looking at.
I got two comments here. One is, this is good. Wish more professionals were on here. And also, Dr. Dixon, good leadership. I'm doing a presentation on developing faculty members with AI to enhance student success.
Mm-hmm.
What does leadership look like in a modern higher education environment?
I think that in this environment, you got to be able to resolve issues. You got to be able to resolve conflict. I think some of the days, like I would say maybe a decade or two ago, a lot of people were coming into this space because it was fun. You do a lot of activities with students. You work with student housing. You do the programming, the concerts, and things of that nature. But our students are coming into these spaces with challenges that are a lot more complex than we've ever seen in the history of higher education. And so a lot of them are coming in with trauma from their childhood. They're coming in with, they may not have a lot of resources. So a lot of time they may not know where their next meal is going to come from. They may not have somewhere to stay. And they're using higher education to escape the hardship that they're living in. But in the process of going through there, it's still, it's a challenge. And then when you throw in a lot of the back and forth politically that you see from both sides, or you throw in some of the challenges of, just other issues that arise when you're dealing with social media. And you just have to be someone that can understand the system, and you have to be someone who can navigate hard conversations, because there are going to be a period of time over the next 5 or 6 years where higher education is going to go through a transition. And if you are a leader and you don't know how to make decisions, or if you're not comfortable making decisions, it's going to be an uphill battle for you and your institution.
Hey, I made a mistake here when I read that last comment. It should be EI, not AI. I did say AI, so forgive me for that.
No problem.
What are the biggest challenges facing colleges and universities today?
I think the biggest challenge that we're seeing at the 4-year level is the pushback that we're seeing from families and from the job market, of saying individuals aren't prepared for the workforce. And so I think that institutions are struggling, trying to figure out, how do we maintain our historical value of creating well-rounded students, because that's important. But we also got to make sure that we are preparing individuals for the workforce, because ultimately that's the reason why you chose to go to college, so that you can get a job and be prepared.
Now, now this is the one thing. Now, in coming through college, getting the MBA, all that good stuff. Now, the thing is that I want you to tell me this, because I'm sure that the functionalities at a lot of these schools are not the same. When you say you want the students to be prepared for the workforce going out, what exactly does that mean, and what does that look like?
It looks different from different perspectives. I think that a lot of individuals, and even myself, when I went to college, I thought I was going to what I would consider now is like a job training or a skill training, if that makes sense. I'm coming to you, you're going to teach me a skill, and then I'm going to go out and be able to use that skill. But somewhere along the lines, I feel like higher education in general kind of, I won't say they strayed away from that, because I don't necessarily know if that was the only purpose of it. But a lot of times you'll have those degrees that'll give you a lot of foundation or knowledge about an area, or it'll have a lot of overview of what the field includes, but it don't necessarily give you a tangible skill when you walk out the door. And so you have a lot of job or industries that are saying, listen, these people, when they walk out the door, they don't necessarily have a skill, or they don't have the training. And now institutions are looking around, like trying to figure out, how do we make sure that we are having individuals that are prepared to enter the workforce and be able to go out and have the skills that they need in order for them to be successful.
Now you know this much better than I do, and so like in getting entrenched in this is, let me just tell you what I was thinking and kind of like what I see, and you tell me, and you maybe you can shape this for me.
Okay.
Is that I know that when you're going into colleges and universities, you go in there, and the transition from high school to that next level is to teach you the concepts and the fundamentals of what it is for a profession.
Yes.
So when you go out, you have to be able to use those concepts. So what you're learning is totally different than high school. So now you're on the grown person level.
Mm-hmm.
So now when you're trying to go out and you're supposed to have particular skills, okay, you're supposed to have particular concepts that are in place to enhance what you have gotten, while you were there. And now that when we look at what's happening in the workforce, it seems like the workforce is not being enriched enough with these college degrees. So can you tell me, does that mean that, like some schools, and when I say some schools, I want you to, let me separate this first. No shade intended. Like not everybody wants to go to Harvard where you're going to graduate. You're going to get a degree regardless of the case. Nobody fails. Now I'm talking about the real schools, okay? The real schools where you go into these schools and you're actually learning these processes, okay? We got to turn that up. What are we missing?
I think that one of the things that we're missing is that we need to have a clear definition of what we consider college and what we consider like a trade school. I think that we have that, but I don't think that individuals on the outside really understand what that means, if that makes sense. And so there are a lot of degrees in higher education that are designed only to help you further your education into a graduate level, if that makes sense. And so it's not designed for you to have a skill when you leave there like a trade, if that makes sense. But like when I'm advising students on college, and it may not be what everybody's approach is, but I always encourage students that if it doesn't look like a trade, I probably would not major in it, if that makes sense. So when I say that, I think about going into trade school in general, whether it's being an electrician or a plumber or whatever those skills are. But then at the 4-year level, the way that I internalize it looking like a trade, I'm thinking about medicine. Like you can take that and go build a practice, or an attorney. You can take that and build a practice, an accountant. You can, or an engineer. Like those majors where I can take that as Derrick Dixon and go out and say I can make money based off of this. It's a high level trade, but essentially it's a trade.
Right.
But when you're in those majors that is like pre whatever the professional school is, you know that the only thing that you're getting out of that degree is that you need to, like, if it's pre-law, you got to go to law school. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think that there are a lot of degrees similar to that, and that's absolutely no shade to any of those degrees because they have a purpose.
Right.
But I think that the general public look at college very different than what those degrees are designed for. And then when someone go and they get one of those degrees and they want to go out and find a job, it's hard to find that market for it because it's not designed for that, if that makes sense.
Okay. Now this is an interesting comment here from Dr. Carswell. It says students coming in unprepared, approximately 50% come in with no plan. We have to start at the beginning of high school level, 9th grade. That's totally unprepared.
Or sooner.
Yeah.
Because we went to this model in the 90s and the early 2000s that everybody has to go to college.
Right.
And then we flooded the college market. And I believe that everybody should have the ability to go to college. They should have the right to go to college, but I don't think that college is for everybody. But we went to this model where I remember years like if you couldn't even get a job at a fast food place without seeing that it was a college degree as a minimum requirement. And so we've kind of flooded the college scene with this, and with that approach, we didn't pay attention to those students in high school who knew that they didn't necessarily want to go to college, but we shamed them in a lot of ways of saying, if you don't go to college, you're less than. I went to high school with two guys. I know one of them was in my class and one of them was the year after me. The time that I met those two guys, they knew without a shadow of a doubt that they were going to be truck drivers. They were going to be in the transportation industry because that's what their family had done. Like, they didn't go fill out no college applications. They didn't go on college visits. They didn't do any of that. Like, some students, when the school would come on campus to college, you would just go just to get out of class because you ain't want to be. No, they didn't even do that. They knew, I want to go into transportation. And in the day that we walked across the stage, that next Monday, they were signing up to go to school to get into the transportation industry. And they've been doing that for since 20 plus years. And I can remember how, individuals would tell them, well, you should consider college. You know you need to try to go get a college degree, but they knew what it was that they wanted to do, and it didn't involve going 4 years to get a college degree. They went and they learned a trade, and now they not only are they driving, but they own their own trucks. And so they are functioning exceptionally well. I say all that to say that we went through that period of time where everybody was told that you absolutely have to go to college and that's the only way. And now we're flooded with college graduates and there's not a lot of jobs for them to navigate.
Put this comment here on the screen. Love trade schools. Many students are made for college, and they're not made for college.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's perfectly fine.
Because, I do understand that part, but, just what I'm thinking about, as I was saying earlier, just about the conceptual part of that,
mm-hmm.
is that, when you're going and you're paying $30,000 a year
mm-hmm.
for education. Now, one, if you got into that school, then that means that they vetted everything in order to let you in. If you get into that school and all of a sudden now you're like this far behind, but they let you in,
mm-hmm.
is there like this 50-50 thing where we need to meet in the middle so we can bring you up and get you to where you need to be, but it may take you an additional 2-3 years to get there? Or is it like we just get you here and then we get you up and we push you out?
Not always. Sometimes there's a lot of there's a really big, when college was extended to the masses and they started recruiting a lot of people, they realized that they had to start creating these kind of developmental courses. So there's times where a student may come into college that wasn't prepared, and their whole first year is all developmental courses. And so, You see what I'm saying? And so it's not like we're just throwing you to the wolves, but the challenge with that is that if you come from a space where you don't have a lot of money and resources, now I've used the whole year of my college time where I'm just paying for developmental courses, and I haven't even gotten into the core or the foundation of my degree. I think that the challenge now is more, I think socially the generation of students are struggling. I think that, academically, the college has the vehicle to kind of get you up to speed, even if it takes you another year.
Right.
Socially, I think that's what the struggle is at right now, because we're dealing with a generation of students that are in college now that their whole K-12 experience was, off the either during or off the back of the No Child Left Behind legislation. And I think that, I try not to get on either side of politics. I try to stay away from that because everybody has their own perception and opinion.
Right.
But the reason why I bring that up is that, when that legislation came forward, it required a lot of schools to take out a lot of those soft skills development from the curriculum, because they had to focus on the testing and standardized testing. And so now we have students that are in college or in medical school or they're transitioning into adulthood that they didn't get those skills like you had when you came through school, or like I received. And now you multiply that by adding social media, and people don't know how to have conversations. I remember I was working on a case with two roommates, and they were arguing with each other via text message. They were in the same room, and
Oh
they were
my
standing there kissing each other. You see what I'm saying? Like the ability to have hard conversations, or the ability to be able to go and do some of those things that we just see as an adult. A lot of students, they're not coming to those spaces with those skills, and it don't matter what you know. And I tell my students all the time, I don't care how competent you are in your knowledge. If I'm a patient and I can't sit with you and have a conversation, you're not going to get to use that knowledge. And so I'm very intentional about making sure that they understand that you have to have those skills to be able to be successful as a professional. And that's across all majors.
I will say this as I move on. I think, professionals like yourself, Dr. Carswell, and the
Mhm.
other educators that have been here on the show before, my hat goes off to you guys because, I mean, seriously, because, you guys are doing the work and you're making a difference, but the struggle is much deeper than where you guys,
Mhm.
can actually get to, but you're trying to make all of these things work. And I have to applaud you guys because this kind of work, especially now, it
Mhm.
matters more than we can ever imagine.
Absolutely. Especially with like Dr. Carswell coming. Like we have to get to like even like so for me, as the role that I serve in as the medical school, I guide students from the time where being a doctor could even be a thought all the way until they get ready to match into residency. And when I go out into a lot of those communities that we want to recruit from, being a doctor is so far fetched from a reality that they think that they can obtain, that I can tell that when I'm having those conversations with them, they just kind of glaze their eyes just kind of glaze over because they don't even think that that's something that's obtainable for them. And so having those conversations early, I was talking with a group of students that are actual medical students now, and I asked them, and about 8 of them out of the 10 said that they knew that they wanted to go to medical school because somebody told them that they could be a doctor. And then I think about how many times, growing up, I've never heard someone tell me that, Derrick, you can go to medical school. Or I think about any of my other peers. Like we have people that eventually became medical doctors, but it wasn't something where someone just kind of sat down and said that this could be your reality, if that makes sense.
So, how do you balance student advocacy with institutional responsibility?
It's a fine line because I think that you have to make sure that you're advocating for the students, because once you lose the students, it's a wrap. Like if you lose their support or their voice as the dean of students, they don't have any confidence in you in the work that you do. But you also have to make sure that you are balancing the fact that you also have a responsibility for the institution that you're serving. And so for me, it's I have a level of vulnerability in being genuine that I try to stick to. And when I'm sitting and I'm talking with leadership, I'm giving them the information as genuine and as detailed as I possibly can, because when I do that, they know that I'm not trying to get them to make a decision based on an agenda, if that makes sense. And then when I'm sitting with a student and they say, "Hey, I'm struggling with this from leadership," I always tell them, "Listen, I can't promise you an outcome, but I can promise you that when I go to the table, that this will be addressed and it'll be processed." And I think that, for so many students, it's another quote that I use in the training that I do where it says that, being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person is almost indistinguishable. And so knowing that someone heard them and went to the table and advocated for them, even if it doesn't change or move mountains, they at least know that you have their best interest in mind.
This is Dr. Carswell had two comments here. The first one is that he says his former private school had two sides, had college prep and trade tracks. This is his first 2 years while he was in school, they were developmental courses, and that was right on point when you said what you said.
Absolutely.
So let's transition over to the gray area, because I think the gray area, this is where I think a lot of people really need to understand the work that you actually put in order to make this a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so this, I know, probably took you like maybe 10 years to get this going.
Oh yeah. And it's still in development.
So tell us, what inspired you to create the gray area?
The gray area is really just it's really just another way of saying conflict. Because I think about the show that like even American Black and White, right? Ideally, that's how you want things to function. You want it to be black and white, right? You want to be able to know that before I make this decision, I need this to be clear, and I need for it to be, in a way in which I can make an informed decision. However, and the reality is that a lot of times the spaces that we manage, whether it's in our personal life, whether it's in work, whether it's in whatever that may be, is very gray. And so it blends. So while we want it to be black and white, sometimes it kind of blends and become gray. And so what I'm worked through is to figure out how do we get into that gray area and make it black and white. So if you have a process within your organization that isn't working, I can sit down and help you manipulate that process and clean it up so that it doesn't have that grayness. It's the black and white that it needs to be. If you are navigating a personal conflict within your work culture, or if you are navigating that with peers, I sit with you and help you figure out how do we get you out of that gray area. And so really the gray area is just mostly, it's just another way for me to say conflict, because conflict is very gray. And that's what makes it uncomfortable for people, because they want it to just be this black and white. If I do this, this is the outcome. And a lot of people don't like working in that gray area, because it requires you to be able to make a decision in a space where you don't necessarily know what the outcome is going to be.
So what does the gray area symbolize in your work?
Mm-hmm. It's a compass. And so if you look at my logo at the top of it, there's a compass. And so I'm guiding individuals of how do you navigate through the challenge that you have. And essentially it's the conflict. And I think that we have a very narrow definition when we think about conflict. So a lot of times we'll think it's just back and forth between two people, if that makes sense. When I say conflict, they think I'm just talking about an argument between two individuals. But the reality is that a conflict, it extends well beyond that. Yes, it could be an argument between you and someone else. But also, if I'm an institution and I have a policy that is in contradiction to my mission, that's also a conflict. Or if I am trying to figure out how to build a process or an organization and I don't know where to start, that's a conflict. If I'm in a situation where, I'm having a situation where I'm trying to figure out how to recenter and fix my own personal life and need coaching, that's a conflict. So anytime you're in that space where it's like, I don't necessarily know what we need to do, you're in the gray area, right? And so we're trying to figure out how do I resolve this. So conflict is not always just this, I got to arguing with my brother and now we're upset with each other.
So how do organizations typically misunderstand conflict?
A lot of times organizations misunderstand conflict because they are full of individuals who don't want to navigate conflict, if that makes sense. I think that the when you think about conflict in general, it's almost always regarded in a negative stance. Like that's if you say, "Give me your perception about conflict." 9 times out of 10, the feedback that you get from the group is going to come through a negative connotation, right? And so I spend a lot of times with organizations helping them to reframe what it actually means. And one of the biggest areas of reframing is that I help individuals understand is that a conflict is an indicator that something isn't working and it's time to fix it and move forward. And so with organizations, because they are a lot of time they're conflict averse, they don't want to acknowledge the conflict. They just want it to just kind of go under the radar because it's going to require them to actually sit down and do some self-reflection. And so my job is to pick up the mirror and say, hey, just because you avoid something doesn't mean that it's going to go away. Most times it's just going to compound. And because you have people that run the organization who aren't comfortable with conflict in their own personal space, that just kind of manifests within the organization in which they work.
Wow. So let me put these two comments on the screen. Dr. Carswell says again, great leadership, Dr. Dixon. Appreciate you, Doc. And congratulations, sir. You got patience and determination for sure. 10 years.
Well, I'm gonna have to connect with Dr. Carswell on LinkedIn. We gotta get connected. I appreciate that. I appreciate that feedback. But yeah, but that's really what that's just a fancy way for me to say I help people resolve conflict, whether it's individually or whether it's within an organization. And from the organization perspective, I utilize a lot of the practices and principles that go along with project management and Lean Six Sigma. Really, it's me utilizing a framework in which I can follow and work with you. So helping you identify the issue, bringing the stakeholders to the table, identifying where you are now and where you want to be, and then helping to lead you through the process of getting where you want to be. A lot of times when I'm working with an organization, I may not even have a background in what they are asking me to fix. But my job is focused on creating a system to allow them to put the expertise in to fix the issue.
So you just mentioned something that that actually caught my ear, and when you mentioned Lean Six Sigma, and I introduced in your introduction, we know that you're a black belt. So how does that manufacturing tier? How does that go into your work, especially when it comes to the gray area, or do you use that at all?
Oh, I use it often. I was at the University of Oklahoma, and they would send out these random emails across the college to the faculty and staff and students and say, hey, we have an opportunity. You can get a certification in this area. And so I read the email and I went to my supervisor because I was still new in the community. I said, do we have to pay for this? They were like, no, when it comes through that system, it's a free opportunity. And I knew about Lean Six Sigma through the fact that I knew people that worked in manufacturing and what it looked like. I was very vague on what it meant, but I'm always a learner. And so it was free. And so I went to they had like a foundational, I think it was like the white belt and the yellow belt, which is the foundational tier. And I was sitting there and I was listening to them talk about processes and procedures. And I was like, wait a minute. Because an average person that works in higher education may not have made this connection. But because of the positions that I had been put in, every job that I had up to that point it required me to build something from scratch or create processes and procedures or put something in place. And so when I was listening to the instructor talk, I was like, this is basically what you do in higher education. You're a project manager and you're trying to figure out how do you constantly improve and make things better. But we're just kind of randomly doing it and hoping for the best. And then next thing you know, we got to come back to the table and figure out, okay, what do we need to do instead? Because that didn't work. But when I was looking at the system that goes along with utilizing Lean Six Sigma, where you have a very intentional way in which you are implementing change or you're fixing systems, it just registered. It registered with me, and it was one of those things where it's like I do a lot of reading and exploration outside of higher education, and then I figure out how can I pull it into the space. And when I saw it, I said, so I may not need all of these components because we don't have the production or the, we don't have it at that level. Like we don't have thousands or millions of products that we're fixing. But the foundation of making sure something is as efficient as it possibly can be, picking apart like the root causes, identifying areas where the bottlenecks exist, and then really figuring out how do you create a process or an outline of what the process currently looks like. There are so many times that an organization will go in and try to fix a problem and they don't even realize that they don't even know what the current state looks like. Like they haven't even mapped out the current state. And so really making sure that's mapped out, finding the bottlenecks, and then taking them from that state to the state where they want to be. And then once you get to the state where you want to be, now how do I make sure that you can maintain and control that so that moving forward, that process working, you're not at the table again trying to figure out how to move forward.
Wow. Then that's like the logistical side of to an operation to where that can be multifunctional. Absolutely. To where that can cross over into many parts of what you do.
Absolutely.
And so just in thinking about that, and let's again coming back to the gray area. So can you tell me, and tell me again if I'm wrong, but does this mean like when you see the problem and let's say you're gonna use your Six Sigma operation. So when you see that problem, do you break that down and you process it all the way across to that final solution?
So if someone wants me to take that approach, then that's the system that we follow. So the gray area, so it's spelled that way. I was intentional. So the G is for grounding the issue, right? And sit down, identify the issue, and just really put it on the table. Like, what is it that you're dealing with? Then we reveal. So the R is for reveal a system. And so what is the system that currently functions that this issue is manifesting in? And because if we don't see the system, if we don't know the issue that's created, and then if we don't know the system that is manifesting in, how can we resolve the issue, right? And so the first E is then you engage the stakeholders. And so I got the issue based on the leader that brought me to the table. We ground the issue, then we reveal a system through a series of just kind of evaluating what the process is currently. Then I find all the stakeholders that have some kind of an input on how that system is currently functioning, and the stakeholders who have some say in how we want it to function moving forward, because it could extend across multiple areas of the organization, across the system. Because the person that brought it to me may feel like this is something that it needs to do, doesn't mean that the other areas that will be impacted may feel like that's a feasible reality, if that makes sense. And when we bring all those individuals to the table, the why is for yielding shared vision. So now as a group, we're going to figure out, we understand the entire system. And so how do we create this in a way so that the entire system can function effectively and be better, if that makes sense?
Yes, it is. I love that. So you got to have a good researcher.
Absolutely. So then we align, like while we're together, we align what the policy and the practices should be. And then we go through the process for repairing it. And we repair it, and then we evaluate it, and then we anchor the change. So each area in the gray area it represents a step in the process.
So what is the first step in transforming a dysfunctional system?
You got to identify it. You got to identify the issue, because if you don't identify the issue at the root, like a lot of times you can spend so much time trying to fix something, but if you don't identify the root cause, you're wasting a lot of time. And you may not be able to identify the root cause at the very beginning, because you got to go through a series of trying to figure out how is the system functioning and flowing. But if you don't at some point in time know what the root cause is, you're going to just be spinning your wheels. There's a there is a theory that I learned when I was in working on my doctorate as an organizational development theory, Bowman and Deal, and it was transformative for me. Bowman and Deal frame of reframing organizations, and essentially, they're in a nutshell. What they're saying is that if you are going to go in and fix a problem or reframe it, there's four frames that you have to see those issues through, right? So there's a structural frame, which is human resources. I mean, not human resources, but the policies and procedures, the structure of the organization, right? Like all of those things that make it up. The human resources frame focuses on the human capital or the human resources that are in the organization. The symbolic frame focuses on the institutional culture, and then there's a political frame, and so the politics of the institution. And why that's so important is because what they're saying, and the way that I utilize this, is that a lot of times when we're trying to reframe or shift organizations, especially in higher education, we're always trying to figure out how to create a new policy, right? If something is not going right, well, let's go create a new policy, or let's go figure out, how to make the policy we have better. The policy could be fine. The reality is that you could have the wrong person in the role that's administering the policy, right? Or you could have a situation where culturally that's just not going to work for this institution. And so, but if you don't see it through those multiple frames, you spend so much time trying to create a new policy when it could be culture and politics, or it could be the person, or it could be a situation where the framework helped me to shift my perspective to only seeing things in one way. So when I'm working with someone to try to identify the root cause or ground the issue, I'm looking through those multiple lenses to make sure we're working through the right context.
I'm sorry, but I just want to I want to ask you one more question about that, because when I hear that now, what that sounded like to me is doing a great benchmark.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you do a great benchmark, the
Yep.
benchmark helps you to actually elevate that situation, because you've got three lenses or three comparables that
Yep.
you can look at.
Absolutely. You're right on target. And you don't want to get all the way to the end of just randomly throwing, like, it was explained to me like this. When I explained it to people like this. The way I designed this system is that in traditional higher education, when you're trying to fix something, it's like someone turned the lights off and start throwing darts at a dartboard, and then when you turn the light on, you hope that you hit the mark. But what this is designed to do is to be able to, one, leave the light on, but take the dart and walk it up to the board and put it exactly where you want it to go, if that makes sense. And then if you put it exactly where you want it to go, you don't have to worry about, did I miss the mark or did I miss the bullseye?
How do you help leaders navigate uncertainty?
I create a space for them to be vulnerable. I think a lot of times as leaders, you don't necessarily know where you can be vulnerable, or if you don't know that if I share this as a concern, or if I share that I'm not quite sure how to navigate this, what does that say about my identity as a leader? And then a lot of times they just kind of internalize the fact that they don't feel that they can share that, and then they just continue to kind of spin their wheels trying to figure it out on their own. So I try to create a space where they can be vulnerable and know that when you're having this conversation with me, it's not going to be a situation where it turns into, oh, our leader don't know what they're doing. It's okay if you don't, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to fix the problem. And then also I do some recentering with them to help them understand, like, Sometimes we're doing stuff in organizations or higher education or whatever that may be solely because we're watching other people do it. Maybe our competitors, or this is what we've always done. But I give individuals the permission to reevaluate who is it that you want to be? What do you want your organization to be? And how do you want it to function? And then processing through the steps needed to make sure that the way that you're functioning is in alignment with what you see as a leader. A lot of times leaders don't have that space because they're so caught up on trying to put out fires, or they don't have time to just really stop and think about a lot of that. And it's not because they don't have the language or the ability to come up with it. They just never been asked those questions or given that space to be vulnerable.
So, what roles does restorative justice play in organizational change?
Absolutely. So I think that this is one of the things that really separate me in the work that I do, because I explain it in this manner. I feel like the process and the procedures that I've developed and the work and the skills that I have, I feel like I humanize organizational development, because the reality is that we're working with processes and procedures in terms of the structure of how it functions, but there's a person that's leading that process, right? And so if there's a situation where, if there's a situation where someone calls me to the table to say, hey, we need help resolving this issue, 9 times out of 10, there's conflict, right? And it could be conflict with the system, or it could be conflict with leaders. So it could be one manager that has an issue with the other, or it could be people that are upset with the leaders that are overseeing the organization. And I can come in and fix the process. I can fix the structure and all of that that's needed in order for the process to flow. But if I don't go back and look at the human pieces and say, okay, these individuals had conflict, I got to figure out how to resolve that so that we can reintegrate their relationships, so that moving forward, not only do you have a new system that is functioning in the way that you want it to function, but now the relationships that were damaged in the old process has been restored. And now those individuals are back to a cohesive unit. And so restorative justice helps me in that process, because it allows me to help individuals understand the impact that were caused in this old process.
Mhm.
The impact that was caused between the falling out or the dynamic between the leaders, and then also figuring out how do you resolve that and make that space whole as a community, and not just focused on redoing a process or a procedure. How do we make sure that the relationships within that organization has been restored as well?
So, how do you blend Lean Six Sigma with the conflict resolution part?
Very similar to what I outlined. The Lean Six Sigma is the process and the procedures, right? When I'm using that, when I have that hat on, I'm strictly looking at what is the process that you have me working on? How do I make sure that it's fixed and it's rolling? When I have the conflict resolution hat on, I'm thinking through the lens of who are the people that's managing this process, and what harm was caused to them in the process of things kind of going off track. And so Lean Six Sigma allows me to fix that process of what the issue is. And then the conflict resolution allows me to make the people whole again.
So, what is the most common mistake organizations make during conflict?
Thinking that if they ignore it, that it's just going to fix itself. And it's very, it's not common that a situation is just going to automatically fix itself. Sometimes it may, sometimes it could just be a situation where, something just kind of had a glitch in the system and then it just kind of recenters. But to assume that all situations are going to navigate in that way, I think that a lot of times organizations have a challenge or a problem with being vulnerable, or they have an identity crisis, if that makes sense. That if I accept that this is a problem within the organization, what does that say about me as a leader, or what does that say about my identity? And I think that one of the things that has served me well in my career is that I'm okay with saying I don't know, or I'm not sure, or I thought I knew that was what we should have done, but turns out that it's not. And that's twofold. So a lot of times it takes a person not being, it's a lot of times people are not comfortable being able to say that. And most times the reason why they're not comfortable saying that is because they're not in a system that allows them to say that. And I'm very intentional about the staff that I supervise, and making sure that they understand that we can fix whatever issue that arises, as long as it's not negligent, of course, or something that's putting us in harm's way. But if you make a decision that may not been the best decision, as long as you made it within the parameters of the black and white policy, even if your decision was gray and it didn't work out the way that you thought, you can come to me and we can process through that, because I need you to be comfortable making decisions. There are so many leaders across all industries that have been in spaces where they matriculated their career and they are not comfortable making decisions. And it's baffling to me. Like, I've seen people at the chancellor level, I've seen people at the coordinator level, and everything that's in between. So many people are not comfortable making decisions. And so to acknowledge that they came up short, or acknowledge that they don't know what decision to make, I think that is the foundation of why so many organizations avoid conflict, because it shines a light on what needs to be better. But ignoring it is not going to fix the issue.
So, how do you coach leaders who are afraid of accountability? I know you face that a lot.
I do, and I think that and it just depends on the leader. It depends on where they are in their professional development. If you are in a space where you are just someone who don't want to accept that you came up short, that's a little bit harder to coach, because you got to be willing to know that even if you didn't have the intentions of having a negative impact, you still could have negatively impacted someone, if that makes sense. And so
Yes.
a lot of times it's like, well, I didn't intend to do that, so they just got to get over it. Well, no,
Ooh.
you may not have woke up that morning and said, I'm going to go cause harm to Charles with this decision, but that decision could have indirectly caused harm to you. And when you come to me and say, hey, this is what happened to me, I have to help leaders understand that I need you to listen to what they're saying. If you're someone who is more inclined to listen, that's a little bit easier support. It's just helping you understand how to, take that information, take that feedback, and not over internalize it. Because a lot of times it can be a situation where you take that feedback and it just beats you up so much that you're afraid to make decisions moving forward, or you're afraid to do whatever you need to, because you're worried about, oh, I don't want to get feedback like that again. So it just depends. I don't know if I have a good answer for that question, because there's a lot of just trial and error of trying to figure out how do I make it click for that person, as opposed to being able to kind of give more of a broad response.
Final question for you. What transformation story from your consulting work stands out the most?
I was working with an organization, and they had it was a higher education organization, and they were having issues with their Title IX process. So for people that don't know, Title IX is the law / mandate that institutions have to follow when it pertains to relationship and dating violence and sexual assault and things of that nature. And so institutions have mandates that they have to follow throughout, as that's given by the federal government, saying that you have to follow these mandates, and if your processes and procedures don't fall within these mandates, then you can be fined. And so at the time when I was working with that organization, it was a little bit more of a strict mandate in place as opposed to what's in place now. But it was taking them hundreds of days to resolve a complaint. And they weren't just sitting there negligent or ignoring it. It's just because their process was so slow and they had so many bottlenecks. Like the Title IX coordinator, whenever she met with, before she met with a student, she always had to meet with general counsel first. Meaning, and then sometimes it would take her a week to get on general counsel's calendar, right? And so now that adds a week to the time. And so I sat down with them and we processed through their system. And by the time we had removed the bottlenecks and the time that we had put in better practices and procedures through root cause analysis and controlling the work that we were doing, we got their process down to like 45 days. The mandate at the time was 90. We got it down to half. They were over like 120, 130 days on average. And that may not sound a lot to some individuals, but for a higher education institution and trying to make sure that they are within the parameters of Title IX, that's a lot. And I was very proud of that because it was one of the first areas where, going back to what we were talking about earlier, people didn't understand how the Lean Six Sigma could work with a higher education process. And so being able to sit down and pull out the pieces from Lean Six Sigma that was relevant to an administrative process and be able to walk that through from start to finish and then to see the outcome, yeah, it was very transformative for me because it was the first time that I was able to see like the theory that I had sitting in that training that this could be applicable actually does work.
Okay. So in closing, do you have some words of wisdom and encouragement you'd like to leave for our audience, as well as tell them how to connect with you via your social media, your website, how to get your book, all of those good things?
So I think that my closing statement is, or my closing guidance would just be, don't always view conflict as a threat, or don't always view it as something that you want to avoid at all costs. Because you will hear people say it all the time, I don't do conflict, I don't want to have to deal with it. If the things that you were managing were in a space to be the best that it could be, the conflict wouldn't be there. And conflict is a vehicle in order for you to move forward, and that's whether that's in your dating life, that's whether it's work, that could be your community, that could be any space in which that is present. It's always an indication that something needs to change and be better. And so the gray area is where you are, and you want it to be black and white. That's why the show is American Black and White. We want it to be black and white. But a lot of times we start in the gray. And if you're not comfortable enough with resolving the conflict that got you in the gray area, you're not going to get to that black and white that you hope to find. I can share my all of my contact information with you, Charles, for my LinkedIn, my website, information related to how I can be contacted, and you can feel free to share that with your group, and then I think that'd be the best way to do it.
Okay. So before I'm gonna, as I close the show, do you have a couple of minutes after I close the show?
Sure.
So first of all, I want to tell you guys, Dr. Dixon will be back, and we will complete this with a part 2. The second thing is I want to thank each and every individual that's here tonight watching this show and getting all of the great knowledge and work that Dr. Dixon is laying out, because the process itself is what matters so much as to how we go through to whether solving conflict or it's just dealing with everyday life, because these are things that we have to deal with. And for those of you that are watching on all of our channels, including the YouTube channels, if you have not yet subscribed and enabled all notifications, I ask if you will please support us by subscribing and enabling all notifications, where you'll get the notifications when the shows go live. You'll get each and every show. You will also get the opportunity to go back to the channel and watch each and every episode that's been done, where you get all of the knowledge from all of the great leaders that have been here. So in closing, Dr. Derrick D. Dixon reminds us that leadership is not about avoiding conflict, it's about transforming it. His work teaches us that spaces we fear the most, the gray areas, are often the places where growth, truth, and healing live. From higher education to community spaces, from organizational systems to personal relationships, Dr. Dixon has shown that clarity is possible, accountability is powerful, and transformation is within reach. As we close tonight's conversation, we honor the leaders who shaped him, the communities that raised him, and the mission that drives him. May we all find the courage to step into our own gray areas and emerge stronger. This has been America in Black and White. I'm Charles King. Good night. You guys have a great evening. And if you get the opportunity, please join us tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern Time for another great episode of Changing Trends and Times, as we will be talking about political situations that are happening today with these parties that you guys should be able to take some information from and make your lives